Why was she so calm when everyone else in the diner was afraid? The three men had walked in like they owned the place. Leather jackets creaked as they moved, boots hitting the checkered linoleum with heavy purpose. Their laughter was loud, sharp, the kind that cuts into a room until everyone else goes quiet. The atmosphere had shifted instantly, the way a peaceful stream suddenly darkens when storm clouds gather overhead. Customers lowered their eyes. Forks hovered, untouched. Even the teenage waitress, clutching her order pad too tightly, kept glancing toward the exit as though she might bolt at any second. But by the window, she didn't move. Sarah, 34, hair brushing softly against her shoulders, blue eyes that carried too much history. She sat in her wheelchair like it was an extension of her body, not a limitation. A simple white shirt, dark jeans, and posture so precise that any trained soldier would recognize it instantly. She wasn't slouched, wasn't casual. Every angle of her body spoke of discipline and readiness. But to anyone else, she looked like a quiet woman in a chair, pretending to be invisible. Invisible. That's what she had hoped to be when she rolled into Murphy's diner that afternoon. It was her routine when she needed to breathe. Order a black coffee and a slice of pie, sit by the window where she could watch the highway stretch toward the horizon, and imagine for a moment that life was normal again. No missions, no gunfire echoing in her head, no memories that refused to let go. Just the hum of conversations, the smell of bacon grease, and the clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Normal, she craved it like oxygen. But normal had a way of avoiding her. At 2:47 p.m. the sound came, the deep-throated growl of motorcycle engines outside, not just 1-3 in unison. They cut through the late afternoon like warning drums. Heads turned toward the windows as three rolled into the parking lot, chrome gleaming, exhaust pipes spitting defiance. Sarah didn't look up. She didn't need to. The sound alone painted the picture. Trouble. The men dismounted with practiced swagger. Leather vests, patches sewn into them, skulls and flames. Their confidence wasn't earned. It was borrowed from fear, from intimidation, from the silence of others. They pushed open the diner door like it was a stage curtain, and they were stepping into their show. The leader was built like a boulder, arms covered in faded tattoos, beard thick and unkempt, eyes cold and hungry for someone to notice him. His name, though Sarah didn't know it yet, was Crusher. Beside him, thin and restless, came Venom. His body twitched with the telltale energy of a man who hadn't slept sober in weeks. And then Blade, hands, sneer curling like a permanent invitation to violence. The diner froze. Conversations cut off mid-word. A mother pulled her children closer. An old veteran at the counter stiffened, then lowered his gaze when his wife placed a trembling hand on his wrist. Sarah turned a page in her book. The Art of War, of course. She had read it a dozen times before under different skis, with sandstorms or monsoon rains outside her tent. She didn't even need to look at the words anymore. She read for rhythm, for discipline, the same way she had once disassembled and reassembled her rifle again and again until it felt like breathing. Her lips moved silently. Appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. Crusher saw her, saw the wheelchair first, the patch second, the stillness third. And it irritated him. Because Sarah didn't flinch, didn't cower, didn't acknowledge him at all. In his world, people noticed, people gave way, people feared him. She didn't. She turned another page. "Hey, princess," Crusher's voice boomed across the diner, cracking through the silence. "You deaf or just stupid?" The teenage waitress flinched. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone coughed nervously. Sarah placed her finger on the corner of her page and paused, but she didn't look up. That pause, that refusal, was enough. Venom laughed, the sound high and cruel. "Guess she didn't hear you, big man." Blade leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Nah, she heard, look at her, thinks she's better than us." Sarah breathed in slow, held it for a moment, exhaled. She had been mocked before. She had been underestimated before. Once in another country, men who had dismissed her as weak never lived to regret their mistake. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a diner, and she wanted so badly not to fight. Crusher pushed back from his booth, the chair legs screeching against the floor. He walked toward her, boots echoing like drumbeats. He stopped just in front of her table, casting a long shadow across her book. "Look at this," he said, voice dripping with mockery as his eyes landed on the Special Forces tab affixed to her wheelchair. Little army girl playing dress-up. Venom and Blade joined him, flanking him like hyenas circling a lioness they thought was wounded. The air in the diner grew heavy. Customers didn't dare move. The old veteran's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. The waitress retreated behind the register, biting her lip to keep it from trembling. Sarah lifted her gaze at last. Blue eyes met Crusher's, calm, steady. "I earned it," she said. 3 words, nothing more. Venom burst out laughing, bending over as if the weight of his amusement might break him in two. Blade slapped the counter, wheezing. Crusher smirked, shaking his head. "Yeah," Crusher leaned down, so close she could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath. "I'm sure Special Forces is letting cripples in these days. What's next? Blind fighter pilots, deaf radio operators." Their laughter filled the diner, bouncing off walls and windows, smothering every ounce of dignity the room had left. Sarah closed her book, set it down carefully on the table. Her voice was soft, but it cut sharper than any blade. She said, "I think you should return to your table." It was quiet then. So quiet, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen sounded like thunder. Crusher's face darkened. No one had spoken to him like that in years. "Did you just give me an order?" He grabbed the handles of her chair, tilting it back sharply. The sudden movement forced Sarah's hands to clutch the armrests to keep from falling. Gasps rippled through the diner. The waitress covered her mouth with both hands. Sarah's voice didn't change. "Sir, I'm going to ask you once to let go of my chair." He sneered. "Or what? You gonna roll over my feet?" And then he shoved. The wheelchair jolted backward, slamming into the wall. The crash rattled frames, sent a half-full coffee cup tumbling over. Hot liquid spilled across Sarah's lap. A small magnetic case attached beneath her chair dislodged and fell open on the floor. The sound of metal against tile echoed louder than it should have. And then silence. Because ribbons metals slid across the floor like spilled treasure. Bronze star, purple heart, silver star. Awards that told stories of valor most civilians could never imagine. But one object stilled the room more than all the others. A folded American flag, signed. Signed by generals, secretaries, leaders whose names every soldier knew, and inscribed across the corner in golden letters. To Captain Sarah, Green Beret, for extraordinary heroism in the face of impossible odds. No one breathed. Crusher stared down, confusion flickering into something he didn't want to admit, fear. Blade's smirk faltered. Venom shifted, eyes darting toward the window as if escape might already be too late. In the far corner, one man had already moved. Civilian clothes, quiet demeanor, but the way he stood told the truth. A soldier, 82nd Airborne, home on leave. He had recognized the Special Forces tab the moment he walked in. But this was different. A signed flag, a spread of medals most men would never earn in 10 lifetimes. Slipped his phone from his pocket. Outside, away from the gang's eyes, he dialed a number he wasn't supposed to use unless the situation demanded it. Direct line. Fort, 5th Special Forces Group. His voice was steady. "Sir, we've got a situation here." Why didn't anyone move? The diner was full, families, couples, an old veteran, a waitress barely old enough to graduate high school. Dozens of witnesses, dozens of good people. Yet when Crusher shoved Sarah's wheelchair into the wall and metals spilled across the floor, no one stood. Not one voice rose in her defense. The silence itself felt like betrayal. Sarah knew that silence. She had felt it in other places, deserts where allies turned their backs, mountains where villages watched from their windows but never opened their doors. The silence of people who feared the cost of standing up. She didn't blame them. Fear was powerful. Fear had kept her alive too, more than once. But as the ribbons scattered like broken glass, something inside her clenched. Her body was calm, posture straight, shoulders squared, but her mind was shaking, trembling at the edges of memory. Sand, gunfire, a pilot's terrified eyes staring at her as she shoved him toward safety. The weight of rubble, the scream of torn metal, the sudden, merciless silence when her legs stopped being legs. She forced it back. Not here, not now. Crusher leaned down, his shadow stretching long across her lap. He picked up one of the medals between his thick fingers, squinting at it like it was some kind of toy. What's this? Bronze star. Sounds fancy. Probably got it for shooting paper targets, huh? Blade chuckled. Or maybe for falling out of her chair and making people feel sorry for her. Venom crouched, snatching up the folded flag with twitchy hands. He turned it over, saw the gold letters. His face shifted, amusement faltering into unease, but he masked it quickly, forcing a laugh. Signed by generals, huh? Bet you forged it. No way they'd waste ink on someone like you. Sarah's voice was level, unshaken. Put it down. Venom sneered. Or what? She held his gaze, unblinking. Or you'll regret it. The conviction in her tone gave him pause. For a fraction of a second, the twitch in his shoulders slowed, the bravado cracked, but Crusher barked out a laugh and the spell broke. He snatched the flag from Venom and tossed it carelessly back onto the table. The waitress, hands trembling, whispered from behind the counter, "Please, please stop." No one heard her, or maybe no one wanted to. In the corner, Booth spoke quietly into his phone. His eyes never left Sarah. He described the situation in clipped military precision: location, threat, personnel involved. When the voice on the other end went silent at the name Captain, Sarah knew something had shifted. "All of us," the colonel's voice finally said. "Cold, absolute, we're coming." Hung up, his pulse hammering. He glanced around the diner. No one else understood what was about to happen. No one but him. Back at the table, Sarah gathered her ribbons slowly. One by one, her movements deliberate, almost reverent. She placed them on the table in a neat stack, as though to remind herself, and everyone watching, that dignity couldn't be shoved onto the floor. Crusher didn't like it, didn't like her calm, didn't like the way she seemed unbreakable even after he had tried to humiliate her. His voice rose, loud enough to fill the diner. "Look around, sweetheart. Nobody here's coming to save you. Nobody cares. You're just a cripple with a bunch of shiny toys." The words hit harder than the shove. Not because she believed them, but because of the faces around her, the bowed heads, the averted eyes. People cared. She could see it in the tight jaws, the hunched shoulders, but they were paralyzed by fear. How many times had she seen that before? In occupied villages, in war zones, good people silenced by survival. Her throat tightened, not from his insult, but from the truth behind it. For a heartbeat, she felt alone again, just as she had been in those final moments, pinned under rubble, radio silent, wondering if anyone would ever come. But then she remembered someone had come. Her team, her brothers, green berets who had carried her bleeding body out of hell, who had refused to leave her behind even when she ordered them to, who had wept beside her hospital bed when she woke to find her legs gone. Family, that's what they were, and family didn't forget. She looked up at Crusher, her blue eyes steady. "You don't know what family means." The words confused him. He scowled, gripping the arms of her wheelchair again. "What did you say?" "I said," she repeated, voice sharper now, "you don't know what family means." His nostrils flared. Anger was easier than confusion. He shook her chair violently, rattling the frame until her coffee mug toppled, crashing to the floor. The liquid spread dark across the tiles like blood. A woman at a nearby table gasped. The old veteran half rose again, but his wife tugged him back down, tears streaming silently down her face. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Venom, trying to recover his earlier swagger, leaned close and hissed, "No family's coming for you. Nobody even knows your name." But outside, the sound was beginning. Engines, not motorcycles, not the rumble of passing trucks, a deeper, coordinated thunder. Black SUVs rolling into the lot one by one, forming a circle around the diner. Their windows tinted, their presence unmistakable to anyone who had seen official business before. The customers didn't notice yet, too focused on the unfolding humiliation inside, but Sarah noticed, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She knew that sound, she knew that rhythm. And suddenly, the air felt different. Venom was the first to catch it. His eyes darted to the window, his laugh stuttering. Crusher." But Crusher was too deep in his fury. "Shut up," he snapped. He loomed over Sarah, knuckles whitening as he gripped her chair. "You're gonna learn what happens when you disrespect me." Sarah's voice was calm, steady as stone. "You have no idea what's coming." The words weren't a threat, they were a promise. And outside, doors opened in unison. Boots hit the pavement. 32 men moved with silent precision, their formation as natural as breathing. They didn't need uniforms, didn't need weapons visible. Their bearing alone announced who they were. Green Berets. Inside, the customers began to notice. Heads turned toward the windows. Whispers rippled through the room. The teenage waitress dropped her order pad, her eyes widening as dark figures formed a perimeter outside. Blade muttered under his breath, trying to mask his unease. "Who the hell are they?" Sarah didn't answer. She sat in her chair, dignity settling around her like armor. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Family had arrived. Why did the room go so still? One moment, the gang's laughter filled the diner, bouncing cruelly off the walls. The next, the sound outside bled into the space like a tide. The heavy thump of synchronized boots, the low hum of idling engines, the kind of silence that comes only when professionals move with purpose. Venom turned toward the window again, his voice cracking. "Crusher, I think you better look at this." Crusher's grip on Sarah's chair loosened slightly. His eyes flicked toward the glass. His jaw clenched. 8 SUVs, doors open. Men moving out of them not in uniforms but in something more dangerous: simplicity. Jeans, boots, polo shirts. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just presence. And that presence was unmistakable. They didn't walk like regular men. They didn't scatter or shuffle. They flowed, coordinated, silent. Each step measured, each glance covering angles instinctively. The diner's customers pressed toward the glass, whispering in disbelief. The waitress stood frozen, hand covering her mouth. The old veteran's eyes filled with tears. He knew exactly who they were. 32 men, 32 Green Berets. The front door opened without hurry. Not a slam, not a rush. Calm, controlled. Colonel Martinez stepped inside. Mid-40s, silver threading through his black hair, broad-shouldered and calm as a mountain. His eyes swept the room once, taking in everything: the overturned coffee cup, the scattered medals, Sarah seated tall in her chair, and the 3 gang members caught like rats in a trap. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone did the talking. "Captain," he said, his tone shifting instantly, softening as it landed on her. "Are you hurt?" Sarah straightened automatically. Training didn't vanish with injury. Even seated, her spine aligned with the discipline of a soldier reporting to a superior. "No, sir," she said. "Just spilled coffee." The colonel's gaze flicked to the floor. Ribbons, medals, still gleaming under fluorescent light. He crouched down, gathering them one by one with hands that handled them like holy things. When he stood, his voice carried to every corner of the diner. "Ladies and you are in the presence of one of our nation's greatest warriors." The room froze. Sarah's chest tightened. Heat rushed to her cheeks. She had never wanted this. Recognition was a burden, not a gift. But Martinez continued, his words deliberate, his tone reverent. Captain Sarah, Special Forces, for tour, missions behind enemy lines. She has saved more lives than you will ever know. He held up a silver star, the light catching its surface. She stayed behind so others could escape. She fought until the fight was done. She bled for this country. And when we found her broken under rubble, she still faced the enemy. The old veteran at the counter pushed himself shakily to his feet. His spine bent with age, but his posture straightened as he stood at attention. A woman near the back began to cry softly. The waitress's tears spilled over, streaking her cheeks. Crusher, Venom, and Blade didn't move. They couldn't. The wall of green berets now filled the diner, surrounding them, silent and immovable. Colonel Martinez's eyes hardened as he shifted his focus back to the three men. His voice changed, no longer reverent but steel. So when you mock her chair, when you disrespect her badge, you're not just mocking a woman. You're mocking the very sacrifice that allows you to breathe free air. Crusher swallowed hard. His voice, once booming, shrank to a whisper. We didn't know. Martinez's expression didn't change. You didn't care to know. Sarah sat silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her jaw set. She didn't want their apologies. She didn't want their excuses. But she couldn't stop the ache inside her chest. Because for once, someone was speaking truths she had buried too deep to touch. The truth of what she had given. The truth of what she had lost. Her legs, her career, her Michael. Her throat constricted. She blinked once, steady, forcing back the surge of memory. Colonel Martinez stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. Captain, I told you once, family never leaves family. Did you think we wouldn't come? Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a long moment, she simply breathed, the weight of loyalty pressing against the loneliness she had carried for years. Then softly, I thought maybe they forgot. His expression softened, but his answer was firm. We don't forget. The colonel turned back to the room, his voice carrying command once again. To every man here, she is family. You will treat her as such. The green berets shifted almost imperceptibly, a ripple of agreement, a silent wall of devotion. Sarah lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. Pride, shame, grief, gratitude, all colliding inside her at once, leaving her trembling though her face stayed composed. Around her, the diner seemed to breathe again. Conversations hushed, but eyes stayed locked on her. Admiration, respect, something she had run from, something she had hidden from, now forced upon her like a spotlight she couldn't escape. She wanted to disappear, and yet part of her felt lifted, carried, seen. Crusher cleared his throat, words fumbling from his mouth. Ma'am, we didn't mean. Sarah raised her hand, stopping him cold. Her voice was calm, even. Don't call me ma'am because of medals. Call me ma'am because I'm a person who deserves respect, the same way everyone in this room does. The silence that followed wasn't fear this time. It was shame. The shame of witnesses who had stayed seated, who had watched cruelty unfold without lifting a hand. Sarah let the weight of it hang there. Because sometimes silence had to be broken. And sometimes dignity didn't shout. It simply sat, unshaken, until the world remembered what it was looking at. What did justice look like in a diner filled with silence? Colonel Martinez stood tall, ribbons gathered carefully in his hands, his presence like iron anchoring the room. 32 green berets flanked the walls, silent sentinels, their very existence making it clear this was no ordinary confrontation. Crusher, Venom, and Blade stood trapped between their own arrogance and the immovable weight of a brotherhood they could never understand. Martinez's voice cut through the thick air. Hear what's going to happen. The room stilled again, customers leaning forward without realizing it, breath caught in their throats. You're going to apologize, Martinez said, his tone measured, controlled, deadly quiet. To Captain, properly. You're going to pay for every meal in this diner today, and then you're going to leave and never come back. Not to this diner, not to this town. Crusher's eyes flicked to the exit, but the wall of green berets blocking the door made escape laughable. His throat bobbed. And if we do? The colonel's lips curved in something that wasn't a smile. Then you'll learn why special forces are called the quiet professionals. We don't make threats, we make promises. The words landed like a hammer, not loud, not shouted, but absolute. The gang members froze, the reality dawning at last. This wasn't a fight they could win. This wasn't even a fight that would happen. It was already over, decided before it began. Sarah sat still, eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't want their fear. She didn't want their money. She wanted something else, something harder. Understanding. Her gaze locked on Crusher first. He was still puffed up, still clinging to fragments of bravado even as his face paled. "Do you even know what you mocked?" she asked softly. His mouth opened, closed. No answer came. She turned to Venom, who fidgeted as though every nerve in his body was misfiring. His eyes darted from the ribbons on the table to the flag to her face, but he couldn't hold her gaze for more than a second. Then Blade. He looked away immediately, his jaw tight, shame beginning to seep through the cracks of arrogance. Sarah's voice remained calm, unshaken. "You mocked the chair. You mocked the badge. But this," she gestured to the folded flag, the medals, her own legs hidden beneath the table, "this isn't weakness. This is sacrifice. Every scar, every loss, every sleepless night, it's a cost I paid so you could sit here today, free to choose who you want to be." Her throat tightened, but she forced the words steady. "And you chose cruelty." A murmur rippled through the diner, not from the soldiers, from the civilians. A mother holding her child, a man shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The silence was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of guilt. The old veteran who had tried to stand earlier cleared his throat, his voice gravelly but strong. "She's right, every word, and every one of us should stood up the moment this started." His wife touched his arm, tears sliding down her face. She nodded. Sarah felt something shift then. Not in the gang, not in the soldiers, but in the people. The bystanders who had chosen silence now felt the weight of it pressing down on them. Crusher swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "Captain, I'm sorry, we were wrong." Venom stammered, words tumbling clumsy and broken. "We didn't know, we thought." Sarah cut him off with a raised hand. "That's the problem. You thought you could measure worth by what you saw, by legs that don't work, by medals you don't understand, by silence you mistook for weakness. You didn't care to know who I was. You didn't care to know who anyone might be beneath the surface." Her words weren't just for them. They were for the room, for everyone who had bowed their heads and stayed seated when cruelty entered the diner. Colonel Martinez's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened as he watched her. She didn't need his voice now. She had her own. "You owe this diner an apology," she said, her tone sharpening. "Not just to me, to everyone you made feel small, to every young woman who watched and thought cruelty would always go unanswered, to every child who sat here and learned silence instead of courage." Her words struck deeper than any threat could. Blade's voice came first, low and hoarse. "We're sorry." He turned, forcing his gaze toward the waitress behind the counter. "I'm sorry for scaring you." The girl blinked, stunned, before nodding once quickly. Venom's head dropped. "Sorry," he muttered to the room, the word clumsy but real. Finally, Crusher. His jaw clenched, his pride warring with the truth pressing in from every side. Then his shoulders sagged. His voice broke. "Captain, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I didn't see anything but what I wanted to see." The diner was silent again, but this time the silence was different. Not fear, not shame, reflection. Sarah studied him, then nodded once. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Martinez stepped forward, his voice cutting clean through the quiet. "You'll pay for every meal. You'll leave quietly, and you will remember this day for the rest of your lives." Crusher reached for his wallet, hands trembling. He pulled out every bill he had, laying them on the table in front of Sarah. Venom and Blade followed, fumbling with shaking hands. Sarah didn't touch the money. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice softer now, carrying something beyond command. The next time you see someone who looks different, someone easy to dismiss, remember this moment. Remember that you don't know their battles, you don't know their scars, you don't know their strength. Treat them with the dignity you meet. The three men nodded, faces pale, shame settling heavy in their bones. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the applause began. It was hesitant at first, one pair of hands, then another. The old veteran at the counter clapped, tears running down his cheeks. The mother holding her child joined in. The waitress. The family near the door. And then the room erupted, clapping, cheering, voices rising not for vengeance but for dignity. Sarah sat still, her expression unreadable. Inside, her heart hammered. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to be held up, exposed, remembered. But maybe hiding hadn't been the answer all along. Colonel Martinez placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice quiet enough only she could hear. You see, they needed to be reminded, not just of you, of what sacrifice means, of what it looks like to stand tall even when sitting. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. She nodded once. Justice wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was quiet, steady. It was dignity refusing to be broken. And in that diner, for the first time in years, Sarah felt something she had thought long gone. Hope. Why did applause feel heavier than silence? The sound filled the diner, hands clapping, voices rising, chairs scraping back as people stood. It should have felt like triumph, vindication. The bullies were humbled, the soldiers victorious, the crowd awakened. But for Sarah, seated still in her wheelchair, the roar of approval pressed down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. Because she hadn't wanted this, not like this. She hadn't wanted to be the center of attention, held up like a banner of sacrifice. She had come to the diner for peace, anonymity, the right to sip her coffee and read her book without anyone knowing her name. And now the world saw her not as Sarah, but as Captain Green Beret, the woman who stayed behind when others escaped. Extraordinary heroism in the face of impossible odds. The words carved into her flag echoed in her mind. Words she had tried to bury because they came with memories she couldn't outrun. Michael's face, his last shout before the blast, the weight of sand and rubble crushing down, stealing her future in a single heartbeat. Her jaw tightened, she kept her face calm. Crusher, Venom, and Blade shuffled toward the door, their leather jackets looking suddenly flimsy, their swagger stripped away. At the threshold, Crusher paused. His voice was low, unsteady. Captain, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry for everything you lost. Sarah met his eyes. There was no hate in her gaze, no forgiveness either, just acknowledgement. A simple nod. Then they were gone, swallowed by the late afternoon light outside. The applause surged again as if the room itself needed to cleanse the stain of its silence. People clapped not just for her, but for themselves, for choosing, finally, to honor instead of ignore. The old veteran from the counter moved closer, his cane tapping against the tiles. He stood tall in front of her, his weathered face trembling with emotion. Ma'am, I served 2 tours in Vietnam, but what you did, what you gave up, that's courage they'll be telling stories about long after we're gone. Sarah forced a small smile, her voice quiet. We all serve in our own way, sir. Your courage matters just as much as mine. His eyes glistened. He saluted her, shaky but sharp. She returned it, the gesture simple but heavy, a bridge between generations of sacrifice. The diner owner bustled forward then, a woman in her 60s with flour on her apron and tears in her eyes. Captain, your meals are free here for life. That's the least we can do. Sarah's lips curved in the faintest smile. Thank you, ma'am, but all I really wanted was coffee. The owner laughed through her tears. Then coffee it is, strong and hot forever. The sound of laughter, real and warm, rippled through the diner. For the first time since the gang had entered, the air felt lighter. But Sarah's heart remained heavy. Because even surrounded by respect, even sheltered by her brothers in arms, she couldn't escape the truth. She was a symbol now, whether she wanted to be or not. A woman in a wheelchair who refused to be broken. A soldier whose scars had become stories others needed to hear. She had never asked for that role, but maybe it wasn't about asking. Colonel Martinez moved closer, his eyes soft now, no trace of the fire that had burned moments before. "Captain, you don't have to hide anymore. They need to see you. The world needs to see you." Her voice was almost a whisper. "I never wanted to be seen." Martinez studied her, then placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Heroes rarely do. Behind him, the green berets began to file out, their movements quiet, precise, respectful. They didn't linger, didn't boast. They came, they stood, they protected, and now they left as they always did. Quiet professionals. But not all of them left right away. The young paratrooper who had made the call approached her table. His posture straightened, his boots clicking together as he snapped to attention. His salute was crisp, sharp, filled with something more than duty. Admiration. "Captain Sergeant 82nd Airborne. Ma'am, it's an honor." Sarah returned the salute, her hand steady though her heart trembled. "At ease, Sergeant, and thank you for making the call." His voice cracked just slightly as he answered. "No, ma'am, thank you. My unit knows your name, your reputation, we all do. We talk about what you did like it's a legend. And now I know it's real." Sarah looked at him, at the youth still in his face, the fire still in his eyes. And she felt something stir, not pride, not exactly. Responsibility. Because if her story lived in the whispers of young soldiers, then it wasn't hers alone anymore. The applause died down, replaced by quiet conversations. Customers came forward one by one, veterans wanting to shake her hand, families thanking her for their freedom, young people staring at her with awe. She accepted it all with grace, though each word pressed heavier on her chest. By the time the diner settled again, Sarah felt drained. The coffee in front of her had gone cold. Her book lay closed, forgotten. And yet the room around her hummed with something new. Not fear, not shame, respect. She glanced out the window. The SUVs were gone, the green berets vanished as quickly as they had come. Quiet professionals, leaving no trace but the echo of their presence. But their message remained. She wasn't alone, not then, not now, not ever. The teenage waitress approached shyly, her order pad clutched like a shield. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say you're the bravest person I've ever met." Sarah smiled gently, her voice soft but firm. Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. Remember that. The girl nodded quickly, eyes wide, and hurried back to her station, holding those words as if they were armor. Sarah exhaled, slow. Her hands rested lightly on the arms of her chair. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel something that had been buried too long. Not pride, not grief, something quieter. Belonging. Maybe Colonel Martinez was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to let the world see that heroes didn't always stand tall. Sometimes they rolled quietly through life, carrying sacrifice with grace, reminding everyone else what true strength looked like. And as the sun dipped lower outside the diner windows, Sarah, soldier, survivor, reluctant symbol, realized something she hadn't dared admit in years. She still had a mission. Why did memory come hardest when the room was finally quiet? The diner had returned to something like normal. Plates clattered again, coffee poured, conversations resumed in hushed voices. But nothing was the same. Not for Sarah. Not for anyone who had watched three men reduced from swagger to shame. She sat at her table, medals stacked neatly, flag folded carefully once more, coffee steaming fresh. From the outside she looked composed, unshaken, but inside the storm she had held back now broke open. because memory didn't wait for permission. It rushed in when silence fell. She saw Michael. Michael, staff sergeant. The man who had laughed with her under desert stars, who had promised they'd find a cabin by a lake after their last tour, who had slipped a ring into her palm between missions and whispered, "When this is over." But it hadn't been over, not for them. The ambush played again behind her eyes, so vivid she could almost smell the acrid bite of gunpowder, taste the dust in her throat. They'd been surrounded, outnumbered 5-1, pinned down in a village where every alley hid a muzzle, every rooftop a scope. The Navy pilot they had come for was terrified, his voice shaking as Sarah shoved him behind cover. Her men had looked to her, always to her, and she had known the truth in their eyes. They wouldn't all make it out. She had made the call. "Go, take him, move." They had hesitated, loyal to the last. She had raised her weapon, firing into the night, covering their retreat. Michael had stayed. Of course he had. "Not leaving you," he'd said, voice raw. "You have to," she'd snapped back. "That's an order." But Michael had held the line anyway, buying her precious seconds. Seconds that cost him his life. The explosion tore the world apart. When Sarah woke, she was under rubble, her body screaming with pain. Her legs gone, Michael gone, her team safe. And she had lived with that bargain ever since. Now, as she sat in Murphy's diner, surrounded by strangers who suddenly saw her as a hero, her hands trembled beneath the table. Not visibly, never visibly, but enough that she curled them tight against the chair's armrests. The waitress approached again, this time with pie. "On the house," she said softly, placing the plate in front of Sarah. Her eyes were kind, young, filled with admiration. Sarah forced a smile. "Thank you." The girl lingered. "Is it true you fought alone for hours?" Sarah's gaze lowered to the pie, to the neat swirl of whipped cream on top. She didn't answer immediately. Because how do you tell a child that yes, you fought, but you also screamed until your voice broke? You also prayed in whispers no one heard. You also begged fate for one more minute, one more breath. Finally, she said simply, "It's true." The girl's eyes widened. That's amazing." Sarah shook her head gently. "It's not amazing, it's survival, and survival always costs something." The girl didn't understand. She nodded anyway, retreating with wide eyes. Sarah exhaled slowly, alone again. She cut into the pie, but the sweetness turned to ash in her mouth. Colonel Martinez had been right. She couldn't hide forever. But did the world need to know her story? Or did they just want to feel better about their own silence, their own inaction? Applaud the wounded warrior so they didn't have to face their own lack of courage. Her mind turned back to Crusher, Venom, Blade. Their sneers, their shame, their apologies. Would they remember? Would they truly change? Or would they fall back into cruelty the next time they saw someone they thought weak? Her heart ached with the weight of it, because she knew the truth. Most people didn't change. They just learned when to hide their cruelty better. But maybe one person did. Maybe the waitress, trembling but watching. Maybe the mother who held her child closer. Maybe whose voice had carried across states to summon 32 warriors in her defense. Maybe that was enough. Sarah leaned back in her chair, eyes closing briefly. She listened to the murmur of voices, the clink of dishes, the life of a small-town diner resuming its rhythm. She tried to let it soothe her. But then the old veteran spoke again, voice carrying across the room. "You saved lives that day, Captain. Don't you ever forget it." Her eyes opened sharp. Because that was the truth she struggled with most. Yes, she had saved lives. The pilot, her team, families reunited, children born, futures lived. All because she had stayed behind. All because she had given up her own. But Michael was gone. Her legs were gone. The career she had bled for was gone. The weight of sacrifice wasn't in the medals. It was in the empty chair beside her. She pressed her palms against her thighs, against the absence beneath the denim. She felt the ache that never fully disappeared, the ghost pain that sometimes lit her nerves on fire. Hero, survivor, inspiration. The words felt like chains. She wanted to be Sarah again, just Sarah. But maybe that wasn't possible anymore. Because sometimes sacrifice doesn't just take what you give, it takes who you are, and it leaves behind someone you don't always recognize. Her pie sat untouched, her coffee cooled again. And still people stared, not cruelly, not mockingly, but with eyes that carried expectation. Expectation that she would always be strong, always be unshaken, always be the captain who fought for 6 hours against impossible odds. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She was someone else, someone learning every single day how to live with what had been taken. Her jaw tightened, her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall, not here, not now. Instead, she straightened her posture, hands steadying against the chair. Because if they needed a symbol, if they needed to believe in resilience, then she would give it to them. Not because she wanted to, but because maybe, just maybe, the world needed it. And maybe that was her mission now. Not to fight with rifles or lead teams into hostile ground, but to show, simply by existing, that broken wasn't the same as defeated. That survival, even when it cost everything, could still mean something. Sarah opened her eyes fully, blue and clear, steady once more. Outside the diner, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And for the first time in years, she whispered the words she hadn't dared say out loud. For you, Michael, for all of them, I'll keep going. Why did strangers keep coming? By evening, Murphy's family diner looked nothing like the quiet refuge Sarah had entered hours before. Word had spread faster than she could have imagined. The waitress had whispered it to a friend. The old veteran had made a phone call. Someone had posted a trembling video clip online. By sunset, cars were pulling into the lot, headlights washing across the windows, doors swinging open with cautious reverence. They weren't there for the food, they were there for her. At first, Sarah tried to retreat into her coffee, into her book, into the familiar armor of silence. But they came anyway, one by one. Veterans in caps that read Korea or Vietnam, young men in hoodies who had never worn a uniform but had fathers who did, mothers holding children close. Each one approached quietly, almost apologetically, but with the same look in their eyes, gratitude. Captain, thank you. Ma'am, you don't know me, but your story gave me hope. My son's in Afghanistan right now. You're the reason I believe he'll come home. Sarah listened. She nodded. She smiled when she could, but inside her chest ached, because for every word of thanks she felt the weight of what it had cost. They saw the ribbons, the flag, the story polished by distance. They didn't see the nightmares, the phantom pain, the hours spent staring at ceilings wondering who she was without her boots, her rifle, her team. And yet, for the first time, she wondered if maybe that didn't matter. Because what they saw, what they needed to see, wasn't perfection. It was resilience. Proof that broken didn't mean useless. Proof that sacrifice didn't erase dignity. A young boy with wide brown eyes stepped forward, clutching a toy soldier in his hand. He couldn't have been more than 8. He placed the plastic figure carefully on her table. This is my lucky one. You can have it. Sarah's throat tightened. She picked up the toy, studying its molded rifle, its stiff plastic salute. She placed it gently back in his hand, closing his fingers around it. Keep it, she said softly, because luck isn't about what you carry, it's about what you believe you can survive. The boy's mother mouthed thank you, tears in her eyes, and led him away. Sarah exhaled slowly. She had spoken without thinking, but the words lingered. Maybe she was speaking to herself as much as to him. Later, the old veteran returned, this time with others beside him, men with canes, women with weathered faces, all bearing the quiet marks of service. They didn't speak at first. They just stood around her table, a silent circle of recognition. Finally, one of them said, "We thought our stories were forgotten. Thank you for reminding them they're not." Sarah swallowed hard. She hadn't meant to remind anyone. She had only wanted coffee. But maybe this was how it always began, not with a speech, not with a plan, but with a moment where silence broke and someone saw. Colonel Martinez had long since left with his team, the black SUVs vanishing into the horizon. Quiet professionals, already moving to wherever they were needed next. But his words lingered. Heroes rarely want to be seen, but sometimes the world needs them anyway. She had resisted that truth for years. She had rolled through hospitals, therapy centers, VA offices, always keeping her head down, refusing to let anyone turn her into a story. But here, in a small-town diner, in front of strangers whose eyes glistened with gratitude, she felt something shift. Maybe it wasn't about her at all. Maybe it was about them. Returned later that night, still in civilian clothes but standing now. He asked permission before he spoke, his voice low. "Ma'am, some of us younger soldiers, we struggle when we come back. We don't always talk about it. We don't always know how. But hearing you today," he hesitated, his jaw working as if the words cost him. "Hearing you reminded me why we serve, why it matters." Sarah studied him, saw the weight he carried in his eyes, weight she recognized all too well. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said softly. "Not at once, neither do you, ma'am." The words struck deeper than he knew. Neither do you. For so long she had carried it alone, hidden it, pretended it didn't matter, pretended the chair was just a chair, not a monument to what she had lost. But maybe she didn't have to anymore. The evening stretched on. More faces, more stories. A woman who had lost her brother in Iraq. A man whose father never came back from Vietnam. A teenager who confessed he was bullied at school and felt less alone after hearing her speak. Each story pressed into her like stones, heavy but real. Each one reminded her of something she had tried to forget, that sacrifice didn't belong to one person alone. It was shared. It rippled outward, touching lives she would never see. By the time the diner lights dimmed, Sarah was exhausted. Her coffee sat cold again, her pie uneaten, but her heart felt different, not lighter, but steadier. As the last family left, the diner owner wiped tables, humming softly to herself. She glanced at Sarah with a gentle smile. "You know, Captain, you may have come in here for coffee, but you left us all something stronger than that." Sarah tilted her head, curious. "What's that?" "Hope," the woman said simply. The words settled over Sarah like a blanket, heavy, comforting, unavoidable. She wheeled herself toward the door, the night air cool against her skin. The parking lot was mostly empty now, the highway beyond glowing with distant headlights. She paused there, breathing in the quiet. For years she had lived as though her mission had ended under rubble in a foreign desert. But maybe it hadn't ended at all. Maybe it had only changed. Her mission now wasn't about weapons or tactics. It was about truth, about dignity, about showing others, soldiers, civilians, children clutching toy soldiers, that survival itself was a form of courage. She whispered again, this time into the night air. "Michael, I'll carry this, for both of us." The stars overhead flickered faintly. The horizon stretched wide. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And she understood. Maybe this was the mission she hadn't chosen, but the one she was meant to fulfill. Why did leaving feel harder than staying? The diner had finally emptied. Chairs were stacked, lights dimmed, the neon sign buzzing faintly against the dark. Only Sarah remained, still at her booth by the window, coffee cooled to black in front of her. The world outside was quiet now, the highway a ribbon of distant light, the stars watching in silence. She should have gone home hours ago, but home was just a rented house with too many shadows, too much space for memory to creep in. Here, at least, she felt the echo of voices, of stories, of gratitude. Here, she felt connected, even if it was fleeting. Her hands rested lightly on the arms of her chair. She flexed her fingers once, grounding herself. because part of her still trembled, not from fear, from something harder, from being seen. For years, invisibility had been her shield. If no one knew, no one could ask. If no one asked, she didn't have to remember. But today had shattered that shield. Her medals had spilled across a diner floor, her story had been pulled into the light, and 32 brothers had walked in to remind her of something she'd tried to forget. She wasn't alone. The thought was as terrifying as it was comforting. The door creaked, breaking the silence. It wasn't a soldier this time, or a stranger with gratitude heavy in their eyes. It was the teenage waitress, hair pulled back, apron folded in her arms. She hesitated before stepping closer. "Captain." Sarah looked up, her expression softening. "Yes." The girl bit her lip, nervous. "I just wanted to say I've never seen anything like that. You didn't even raise your voice. You didn't hit them, you just sat there. And they crumbled. How did you do that?" Sarah's lips curved in a faint smile. Dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It just holds steady until the world remembers what it's looking at. The girl nodded slowly, absorbing the words. Then she whispered, "I want to be like that." Sarah's chest tightened. She thought of herself at that age, restless, uncertain, trying to find strength in a world that often seemed unforgiving. She wanted to tell the girl the truth, that it wasn't easy, that it came with scars, that sometimes strength meant sitting alone in the dark wishing for things you could never get back. But she also knew the girl didn't need all of that yet. What she needed was belief. "You already can be," Sarah said softly. "Strength isn't something you're given. It's something you choose over and over, even when it hurts." The girl smiled then, shy but genuine. "Thank you." She left, the door jingling softly behind her, leaving Sarah alone once more. But not empty. She turned her gaze back to the window. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the soldier she remembered, boots in the sand, rifle at the ready, Michael's hand brushing hers under a star-filled desert sky. It was a woman in a wheelchair, hair loose around her shoulders, medals stacked neatly on the table beside her. A survivor, a reminder, a symbol whether she wanted to be or not. She studied that reflection, her blue eyes meeting her own, and for the first time she didn't look away. Because maybe this was who she was now. Not just Sarah, Green Beret, not just Sarah, wounded veteran, but Sarah, living proof that sacrifice didn't end with loss. Her mission had changed, but it was still a mission. To remind people, to stand, even seated, as a quiet rebuke to cruelty. To carry Michael's memory and the memory of every soldier who hadn't made it home. To give hope to those who thought their scars meant the end. She gathered her medals carefully, slipping them back into their case. Her hands lingered on the folded flag, fingertips brushing the gold letters. For extraordinary heroism in the face of impossible odds. She closed her eyes briefly. "Michael, I'm still here. I'll carry it for both of us." When she opened them again, her expression was calm, steady, resolved. She rolled toward the door, each push of her wheels smooth, deliberate. The night air greeted her with cool relief. The stars stretched wide overhead, silent witnesses to everything she had endured, everything she had become. The parking lot was empty now. The SUVs were gone. The town was quiet. But in the stillness, Sarah felt something she hadn't in years. Purpose. And as she moved forward, down the ramp and into the night, her voice broke the silence one last time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The words hung in the air, soft but unshakable, like the echo of a promise. And with that, Sarah, soldier, survivor, symbol, rolled into the darkness, carrying with her not just scars, not just loss, but the quiet strength of someone who refused to be broken.